Apache and Ronnie. Today I'm going to present the final product of the English project that's Feminism and the Contemporary Age. For my first guest has Esmeralda Lucero, who is my girlfriend. And hello, Esme. You can introduce yourself, please.
Hello, my name is Esmeralda Lucero. I am 15 years old and I study in American School College of Cuenca.
Okay. Let's continue. The feminism. What is it? The feminism is a social and political movement which starts in the finally 2nd century AD. This moment which supposed the awareness of women as a group of human collective of the oppression, domination, and exploitation of which they have been and are the object of the group of men within the patriarchy under his different historical phases of production model, which moves then to action for the liberation of their sex with all the transformations of the society that it requires. In the Illustrated Dictionary of the Language, feminism is defined simple, short, and clumsily has a social doctrine that grants women equal capacity and the same rights as men. 4 waves of feminism. In general terms, feminism is divided into 4 waves. It is said that we are in the transition period towards the latter, but this is an issue of which there is not complete consensus. The act of advocacy for the defined existing ability and intelligence of women precedents for the formation of feminism has a organized movement, and example of this can be found in ancient Greece, medieval Europe, and even Peru, Japan. The wave number 1, the right to vote and education. The first wave of feminism focused on the demolishing the female role as subordinate and subservient to the male, and the political objectives to achieve these were clear: to achieve the right to vote, which would give them to the power to access equal education, as well as freedom, sexual and financial, of their male guardians. The first wave understood equal rights as the missions of women in political and economic space, but a full existence concept of more aspects. That is, we cannot say that the mere fact of updating their right to vote and through education feminism became egalitarian, or that it has triumphed again and the old life is useful. The right number 2, and the radicalizations and the sexual revolution. The 1916 and the 1917 unfolded within the framework of anti-war movement, mistrust of the state, the civil rights movement, and this growing awareness of social minorities that we are not gender or race. Also radical to within the movement already existing since the first wave. It is normalized and adopted as a fundamental part of feminism's procedure. Voices like those of Gloria Steinem, Angela Davis, or Dolores Huerta become representative of the moment. The center prize of this phase focuses on the reproductive and sexual rights, female empowerment, anti-collisions, and the beginning of an intersectional approach. Then wave number 3, that's in intersectionality and queer theory. The 1980 were especially hard for the LGBT community. The public response to the AIDS epidemic made clear the need to create organizations that advocate for the human dignity of non-heteronormative people. Gender and sexuality began to be a conjuncture issue for both feminism and LGBT movement. The epistemic consequence of this space-time movement is queer theory. The term was coined by Teresa de Lauretis in 1991 in a feminist cultural studies journal. The term encompasses three aspects: don't-dimensionally heterosexuality as the only example of sexuality, challenge the belief that lesbians and gay sexuality study are one thing, and the visibility of our race and ethnicity influence sexual bias. The wave number four, a diverse feminism. The above questions are part of the theoretical framework of the fourth wave of feminism that began in the early whose central themes are sexually harassment, the standard of sexual beauty, and the culture of rape. We are not talking about simple topics, but nuanced feminism has had to constantly redefine itself since in the inception. Within the process, there are always ideas and perspectives that were normal or positive in a specific time context, but are no longer some in the next. Pauline Murray, who laid the legal foundations for the end of racial segregation, defended to use of the word black in the 1914. Gloria Steinem, one of the most prominent leaders of second wave feminism, signed a letter that helped validate the tolerance of transphobic speech in, in 2020. Already thought she shared a different perspective 2 years later, sending another public message in favor of the rights of transgender people in 2022. Statement's producer makes it clear that feminism is not set in stone. It is not exempt for criticism, new learning, and evolution. And he is something that changes even for the same person over the years. It's even more so the millions of people who understand themselves and feminism. Rosa Cabeza de Vaca. Rosa Stacy Cabeza de Vaca was the first woman to enroll as a high school graduate at the Colegio Mejía in the city of Quito. In 1903, obtaining the degree in 1909, she was the daughter of the Manuel Stacy Sanz and Josefa Cabeza de Vaca, who lived in the La Ronda sector of the Ecuadorian capital. Unfortunately, through the history of Ecuador, there has been a lot of exclusions and discrimination against women due to a culture system rooted from our ancestors that considered women to be inferior to men. For many reasons, women have never been seen as an important entity in the history of Ecuador, but only as a complement to men, and what is intended to be shown is the other side of the coin, making visible that women, just as men, have played a learning role in the country. In order for society to stop seeing women in a subordinate way the prevailing patriarchal hegemony, but be restructured in a series of unsynthetic imaginary formulations of sorry, um, breaking with the divisions that seems man has as the sole protagonist of the story. Ermelinda Urbina. Ermelinda Urbina was the first South American woman to receive a pilot's license used by the United States Aeronautical Authority in 1932. Her legacy of odyssey, perseverance, and determination elevated her to the list of the most influential women of the century in Ecuador, who is the mysterious woman about who little is known in public opinion and the popular culture. Ermelinda Urbina Mayorga was born in Ambato, a beautiful city in the Ecuadorian Andes, and 115 kilometers south of Quito on September 7, 26 on 1905. During her childhood, she watched with fascination of the armies of three countries defeated the Allied powers with aerial strikes, and whoever changed the course of history later in what would be considered the golden age of habitation due to the enormous deployment of resources for technological development and innovation in aviation during the period between the wars. Merlina felt the call of Icarus and Daedalus to cross the unexplored immensity of the seas. Okay, Ana de Peralta. Ana of Peralta, she was an Ecuadorian feminist born in Huachiambato province. She was the first woman to protest against the royal decree of 1752, used by the kings of Spain for the prohibiting mestizo women from wearing indigenous and Spanish customs. She created the first women movement in the authority of Ecuador. She is the creator of the first women movement in the royal audience of Quito, and her presence is inscribed with that of other great anonymous rebels who thought the fight for freedom and women's rights. There says that he was able to mobilize 30 million women. In his clothing, he wore a sky blue garment that was taken as a sign of a rebellion and was called La Peralta. Sorry. Beginning that color taking has a reference in some women's associates, especially in Tungurahua. Her surname is unknown, and only that or his husband, who was a merchant in the city, from her we vindicate her as a woman fighter for the right to dress as she wanted cites a problem for which in the royal certificate was published was because they will want to control the sexual appetite of men by forcing women to be more convert in addition to the uses of exclusion by the social class. Matilde Hidalgo de Procel. Through their merits, the name of Matilde Hidalgo de Procel was nominated for the event the Best Ecuadorian. He was born in Loja on September 19 of 1889. His parents were Juan Manuel Hidalgo Pauta and Carmen Navarro de Castillo. In 1895, he entered the Escuela La Inmaculada to complete his primary education. At his young age, he mastered reading, writing, and mastered the piano. Subsequently, and despite 60 sexist greetings. Matilde enrolled in the Colegio Bernardo Valdivieso to finish high school, as her hobby was medicine. Shortly after, she moved to the capital city to continue her higher studies at the Central University of Ecuador. There she obtained the title of doctor in 1921 and thus became the first female doctor in Ecuador. Already a professional, Matilde Hidalgo returns to her hometown to provide her service to the sky. She is received with admiration and respect by the family, friends, and countrymen. Where after a few months, misunderstandings, hatred, and envy began to gain strength. The infamous critic makes him make the hard decisions never to return to Loja. In 1922, his course was Guayaquil. In that city, he got a job at the General Hospital. However, the labor difficulties with the rest of the colleagues continued. A year later, the renowned Doctor married Fernando Procel Lafebre, an outstanding process of history, but of a woman settled in Machado. He procreated two sons, Fernando Lenin and Gonzalo Enrique, in 1924. After overcoming some obstacles, she managed to become the first photographers in Ecuador and Latin America, a right tenured to women for several years. Okay, yes, you can say your opinion or a conclusion for this topic.
Okay, so my opinion on feminism is that it seems really good to me that at least one group of women work and fight for a specific objective, which could be to have the same right as men. And apart from that, they not only ask for that, they also seek to do justice for deaths, disappearance, and other things that happen day by day with women. I think it's something that most men could not understand because they are not the ones who suffer and live day by day, since it is very difficult for a woman to do things that for men are considered like normal, such as the simple fact of taking a taxi, walking quietly, and at night, or wearing clothes of their choice. And I also think there were many women who do really good things like to have the same rights as men, and they fight a lot. So I think these days there are like some more justice than before, and that's really good in my opinion.
Okay, thanks. And let's continue to the other topic, that is the contemporary age. What is it? The contemporary age is the historical period that covers from the year 1789 with the French Revolution to be present. For this reason, the contemporary age is an extensive and not yet delimited period, with numerous events such as the consolidation of the capitalist system, the Industrial Revolution, technological development, and the Great World Wars. The main events: the French Revolution, the Industrial Revolution, the First World War, the Russian Revolution, and the Second World War, and the Cold War. Let's continue. The French Revolution. The French Revolution was a political, social, and ideological movement that developed in France from 1789 to 1804. It began with the taking of the Bastille on July 14 to 1789 and culminated in the coronation of Napoleon Bonaparte as Emperor of the French of December 2 of 1804. The French Revolution had a protagonist, opponents, and supporters of the old regime. This political, social, and economic system was characterized by the absolute monarchy and legacy divided state society into privileged and non-privileged sectors. The French Revolution put an end to absolutism, feudalism, serfdom, and the privileges of the clergy and nobility. Their modes were liberty, equality, and fraternity. Together with the Industrial Revolution, this makes the beginning of a new era in Europe history known as the Contemporary Age. The Industrial Revolution, the process of the transformation in the modes of production and marketing of goods is known as the Industrial Revolution. This transformation had an enormous impact on industrial relations, as well as the social and economic organization of the European states at the beginning and of the rest of the world in a few years. Over time, it modified social relations, the customs of the population, the system of relations between states, generating great change on global scale. The Industrial Revolution process can be divided into two stages. The first, which when they called the First Industrial Revolution, began in the England in the 17th century and continued in the 18th century. Manufactured goods went from beginning produced manually in workshops or small productions until to begin manufactured by the machines in large factories. The second, called the Industrial Revolution, was a phenomenon of the mid-19th century. It has a strong impact on transportation and communications, as well as the emergence of new industries such as chemicals and steel. The First World War. The First World War, as long known as the Great War, was a war conflict that occurred between the 1914 and 1918, which pitted two large blocs against each other. The Triple Alliance, formed by the German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Ottoman Empire. Later, Bulgaria was added. The main leaders of this group of countries, long known as Central Powers, were the German Emperor Wilhelm II and the Austro-Hungarian Emperor Franz Joseph I. Triple Entente, later called Allies of the First World War, made up of France, the Russian Empire, and the Great Britain, then Italy, which was part of the Triple Alliance but changed sides, and the United States, among others, joined. Its main leaders when they were French President Raymond Poincaré, Russian Trust Nicholas II, British Prime Minister David Lloyd George, and U.S. President Woodrow Wilson. The war began on July 28th to 1994 after the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, heir to the throne of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It ended in November 11 to the 1918 when the German Empire, after suffering several defeats and the state by a socialist revolution, requested an armistice that was accepted by his enemies. The Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution was a political and social movement that overthrew the Straits imperial regime that ruled Russia in the authoritarian manner. It began in February to the 1917 with the abdication of Tsar Nicholas II, who was replaced by the provisional government heavily by the moderate socialist Alexander Kerensky. In October, the revolution deepened with the replacement of the provisional government with a government led by the Bolsheviks, who promoted the founding of Soviet Union in 1922. The revolution was commenced at the end of the First World War in a context in which the Russian people were exhausted by the war effort, food shortages, and the repression that the regime imposed to silence all kinds of protest. The Second World War was what was World War II. The Second World War was a military conflict that took place between 1939 and 1945. It faced two large blocks. The Axis might of Nazi Germany faced Italy and Japan. Hungary, Roman, and Bulgaria, among others, joined later. Its main leaders was Adolf Hitler, Benito Mussolini, and the Japanese Emperor Hitori. The Allies. In Italy, formed by the Poland, France, and Great Britain, China, the Soviet Union, and the United States of America, among others, joined later. Its main leaders were the Englishman Winston Churchill, the Soviet Joseph Stalin, and the American Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and the Frenchman Charles de Gaulle. The war involved 23 countries and took place in the Europe, Africa, Asia, Oceania, and the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. It's considered the bloodiest in universal history. It was won by the Allies after 6 years of fighting. Okay, the Cold War. The axis of the conflict was the struggle between the models of the political, social, and economic organization of two superpowers that emerged after the Second World War. USA, leader of the Western Bloc, made up of Japan, Western European countries, Canada, Australia, and the New Zealand. They defend capitalist and economic systems and the liberal democracy as a political system. And the USSR headed the Eastern Bloc, or the external made of the countries occupied by the Red Army and other communist armed forces. Their defense socialist has an economic and social and single-party popular democracy and political regime. The Cold War lasted until the 1918, when the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of socialist governments in Eastern Europe, and the Malta Summit, both and the end of confrontation between the US and the USA and the USSR and their respective allies. And Esme, you can give me a conclusion of this topic and what is the main event in the contemporary age.
Yes, I think some of the mainly events were the declaration of the war by France and Great Britain on Germany on September 3 in 1939. Also, the German invasion of Northern Europe on April 9, 1940, and the German invasion of Western Europe on May 10, 1940. And also, it have a lot of consequences, and it could be considered like benefits, like human rights, the United Nations, the Security Council, international organizations, the Cold War, the end of the empires, and the European Union. Also, we have to mention that there were technological advances. There were the greatest genocide. The way of thinking of society changed toward public figures, and not because a person is a good worker, they had to be such a great conflict as it was. Yeah, that's my opinion.
Okay, thanks, Esme. Thanks for um, put attention for all the presentation. Uh, this is my final product. Uh, Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you.